And as you said, you learn a lot about your team in the non-conference portion, which hopefully can help transition and prepare you for. We all know the WCC is a gauntlet, but I really feel like our non-conference schedule has prepared us for what's to come.
Happy holidays, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer, and as a Christmas gift to us all, WCC play begins this week, and I can't be more excited to finally get conference play going. A couple of teams, St. Mary's and Gonzaga, have set themselves up really well for seeding and positioning for the NCAA tournament. Obviously, we have a long way to go. We have a few more months before we can make any, obviously, decisions on that. But they have put themselves up in good positions. And we also have a number of teams who have put themselves in a position to be in position. That being the USF, Santa Clara, LMU, BYU, all of whom are hovering in the 80 to 100 range in the net and or KenPom. So there's going to be a lot of interesting matchups there. A lot of pitfalls potentially for both Gonzaga and St. Mary's throughout the course of conference play as well. And they're going to look weird in some of the rankings or whatnot, but we've seen a lot of potential from the Santa Clara's, USF's, LMU's, especially recently, BYU on a 5-game winning streak, a lot to kind of dive into. And in this episode, we are going to have a couple of people stopping by. USF head coach Chris Gerlufsen is going to stop by so we can chat some Dons basketball and really kind of see how they're looking as we head into conference play. And then also, I think the matchup of the week is the first matchup, USF and Santa Clara on Thursday night. And with Santa Clara also in that matchup, we're also going to be chatting with Santa Clara play-by-play voice Anthony Passarelli. So he'll be back on. We'll chat with him about the Broncos and where they are coming off a huge win against Boise State. And that's the team we'll start with right now. We have the big matchup on Thursday, Santa Clara and USF. And we'll start with Santa Clara. Santa Clara has put themselves in very good position. I thought a lot of people after last year thought that this team was going to take a step back, myself included. We thought that they would actually be hurting a lot without Jalen Williams, without Josip Vrankic, without PJ Pipes. They were 10-5 entering WCC play a year ago. And as of right now, they sit at 12-3. They're a couple games better than they were a year ago. They got a big win against Boise State, as I mentioned, just the other night, 73-58 in Santa Clara at the Leavey Center. And this is, for Santa Clara, they're rolling off 4 straight wins. They do have some unfortunate losses. San Jose State's an unfortunate one, Central Florida another. But this is a team that's really starting to play well and starting to put it all together. We know, I've talked about Brandon Pajemski off and on throughout the course of the season, how impactful he has been thus far in the non-conference. He leads the team in points, rebounds, assists, steals. He has been everything that they could have possibly hoped for. They hit huge in the transfer portal with Pajemski. But he's not the only one who's come along for the ride. Another guy who I thought was going to take a big step up, and we've really seen it over the last month, has been Carlos Stewart. The sophomore has been averaging just short of 20 points per game since November 30th. He's had performances of 29 and 25. He's shooting 53% from the field. He's shooting 55% from 3. Santa Clara now has a 2-headed monster here with Pajemski and Stewart. And early on, it looked like Santa Clara was going to be as successful as Pajemski would be successful. Now he's not having to carry as much of the load. We've started to see Stewart really play up to some of the aspirations that many at Santa Clara had, but also like just looking at what his resume was in high school in Louisiana, this is a guy who we knew could put up points. And now we're starting to see that come to fruition. He's playing a much larger role for this team. And And my comparison before the year was like, he kind of looks like Jared Brownridge, his build and everything else. And now he's starting to perform much like Jared Brownridge on the court, in the scorebooks. And it's been impressive to see just like his progression through what we've seen throughout the course of the year. And we'll talk with Anthony Passarelli a little bit more about that. But we've also seen contributions from elsewhere. We've seen Parker Brown start to step into some of these leading roles from time to time. He doesn't need to do it all the time, but he's there. We've also seen Keyshawn Justice over the last month really start to come alive and have some of those performances we saw a year ago. And he was great in that role of being kind of like the third option for a team, or like last year, he was the third option behind Jalen Williams and Joseph Brankic. And that worked out really well for Santa Clara. This is the job Herb Sendick has done with this team. Again, we talked about what they lost. They lost a lottery pick, an NBA lottery pick a year ago in Jalen Williams. And this team has reloaded. There's no longer a Santa Clara who's trying to rebuild. We've seen how they can shift very quickly into having this team. And now think about this. The fact that you now have Stewart coming along the ride with Pajemski, the fact that those two are both sophomores right now, I think that's unquestioned at this stage that they are the most dynamic duo in the WCC. I think you can maybe make the case for Max Lewis and Houston Millett at Pepperdine, but Santa Clara is coming up with the results. They're coming up with the wins. And that, I think, is the separator right now for me, is that these two combined right now. It's like, again, you take the average for Pajemski, and he's held that 18 to 19 point average over the course of the season. These two are giving Santa Clara almost 40 points per game between the two of them, between Stewart and Pajemski. And this is huge going into WCC play, and it's going to make them a matchup nightmare for most teams. Now, a lot of the times, like, you can look at most of the programs in the WCC and point to one guy here or there. They have two now growing into two elite scorers, not just one. And so now you have to tangle with the fact that you have to figure out a game plan to stop Pajemski and figure out a way to stop Stewart. And that's going to be a tall task for anyone, even a team like St. Mary's, who Santa Clara does play on Saturday. They're going to be a challenge all conference play long. They started to look the part. I mentioned they've had some stumbles, but Santa Clara is really starting to play the part. Santa Clara is really starting to look like a team that's going to be consistently in this top tier of the WCC. And looking at the Broncos, looking at what they have for the rest of the way their schedule plays out in WCC play, we can just take a look at their schedule and just see that this first week is going to be tough. And I think it's going to say a lot about them. Again, they start with USF and St. Mary's this week, both of them at the Leavey Center. So at the very least, they have that advantage. But you're looking at Gonzaga the following week, and that one is going to be also at the Leavey Center. So they have three big opportunities to get quality wins right away in WCC play. They didn't play Gonzaga all that well last year in the Leavey Center, but they played them so much better the second time around. And within even the first 4 weeks, the first 4 weeks, they both play St. Mary's twice. They have Gonzaga, they have BYU, they have USF. We're going to find out very quickly who Santa Clara is in conference play. And I expect them to be able to knock off St. Mary's once. I do think that they have the potential to do that. I think that they're going to be they're going to be a bit of a matchup nightmare. And they did take one of the matchups last year. Gonzaga, I still think that's a tall order for Santa Clara. I think that their lack of size is still one of the things that you can kind of look at. Jaden Bediako has played well, but they don't have a consistent inside threat offensively. Parker Brown has been that from game to game, but he's not necessarily that every night. And when you're thinking about what some of the other WCC teams bring, especially like Gonzaga and St. Mary's, you're going to have to be able to score on the interior. So we'll see as these matchups come along. and really kind of see like how Santa Clara gets off to a good start. I think it's important for Santa Clara to get off to a good start. They do have matchups with Pacific and Pepperdine mixed into this, but they have a very tough front end of WCC play. So we'll see how Santa Clara fares in that. And with that, let's go ahead and bring in Anthony Passarelli, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the Broncos are going to be bringing once we start this week. All right, I am being joined now by Anthony Passarelli. He is the play-by-play voice for Santa Clara basketball. Anthony, how's it going?
It's going great. Happy holidays, Zach.
Happy holidays. We've got a big matchup this week. We got Santa Clara and USF. Santa Clara, this is a team that lost a few starters. Obviously, you lose a lottery pick in Jalen Williams. You lose Joseph Brankic, PJ Pipes, and yet this team somehow has a better record than they did a year ago at this stage, like 12-3 right now. Talk to me about how Santa Clara has been able to not necessarily recover, because it feels like Herb Sendek has been able to just reload this team throughout the course of the offseason. Now where we see they are now.
Yeah, and that's where you have to start, Zach, right? So Herb and his staff have done a fantastic job recruiting, identifying talent, bringing in players, whether it's using the transfer portal or finding great freshmen in different parts of the country and overseas, right? So that's where it starts. And then one of those players was Brandon Pajimski. And so he was a freshman at Illinois, didn't get a lot of playing time, but clearly has talent. And then Santa Clara was able to find him not long after he put his name into the transfer portal. And he comes to Santa Clara and he's doing everything. I mean, he scores points, he rebounds, he's leading the team in steals, and he kind of sets the tone for how the rest of the team plays. And then you've got some players that didn't get a lot of minutes last year, in Carlos Stewart, for example. He's been scoring a ton for Santa Clara. He brings an energy that's usually unmatched by the opponent. And then you've got the veteran in Keyshawn Justice, who's one of the best three-point shooters in school history. So you couple the staff with some of those players and some developing players off the bench, and along with the training staff and the strength and conditioning coaches and all of that, to get them through kind of a heavy travel early part of the non-conference schedule. And the team's playing well and they have confidence. And you mentioned USF, whether it's two teams playing this year or last year or 50 years ago, this is always a Bay Area rivalry that seems to produce good games.
Yeah, one of the best games last year. Obviously, I think it was it's like 1 overtime, 2 overtime in that one a year ago. It was just such a fun watch to see that one. But you talked about one person in particular who I think is starting to feel like he's coming to his own, is Carlos Stewart. I was looking at the numbers in the last month since I think it's November 30th, he's averaging almost 20 a game. He's shooting 53% from the field. Kind of talk about what you have seen from him and his development from just last year to this year, but also just from what we've seen from him at the beginning of this year to where he is now.
Well, there were a couple of games last year where Carlos got a chance to start, and PJ Pipes was out. I believe it was with a minor injury. So he couldn't play for a couple of games. It was a non-conference schedule. And one of the games in particular was against San Jose State, which is another South Bay rivalry down here. And so Carlos, I think, had a 20-point game there. Like I said, his energy, and he just goes. He's got an engine that is, like I said, usually unmatched by whomever he's playing against. So just to see that, kind of a glimpse of that, and then he would come off the bench and provide that. I don't know if you remember Vinnie Johnson of the Detroit Pistons a long time ago. So he was the microwave. So we kind of have our own version of that last year. Well, PJ Pipes moves on, and so Carlos gets a chance to start. And right from the beginning, Brandon Pajimski was scoring, but Carlos was just providing a lot. Defensively and scoring points, and he's an excellent free throw shooter. His 3-point shot started to come along, and then maybe he had one or two drop-off games. And all I mean by that is, maybe he didn't score 20 points, maybe he scored 6 or 8, and you might look at the stats like you and I both do, and somebody from the outside might go, well, that was a drop-off game, or he just didn't play up to the level he wanted. Mm-hmm. So I had a chance to interview him after one of his you mentioned the run in November and into December. I had a chance to interview him. I said, so you had kind of an off game, but these last 5 or 6 games, you've just been fantastic. He said, well, I want to show everybody that I'm the guy that I know that I can be. Playing all different aspects and support the team. So his development has been just amazing. But I think if you saw him with that glimpse last year against San Jose State or those couple of games, you know that he can be that player. And I said, why are you able to do this? And he said, well, I'm working hard. I'm working with the coaching staff after practice. I'm getting shots up. I'm working hard, and I want to be that guy game in and game out. So he's proving that with that work, he can be that guy.
I looked at him, just like his frame, like reminded me a lot of Jared Brownridge of a few years back. And now we're starting to see almost that explosiveness that Brownridge was able to bring. I mean, like, I knew, like, whenever Jared Brownridge stepped onto the court, like, you were in for a tough night, because he would be able to kind of bring it a lot like Carlos Stewart has been able to do so far. And talk about, like, now it seems like Santa Clara has, like, this great 1-2 punch with Pajemski and Stewart, and the fact that both of them are sophomores, just kind of talking about, like, just like what level of excitement that kind of brings, knowing that now you almost have like 2 number 1 options, and they're going to be here for a few years. Yeah,
incredibly exciting. And the guys that are playing around them are excited to go out every game. Not they weren't last year or the year before. They're always out ready to play and ready to get a win. But the fan base is energized and is excited. I mean, starting last year, right? Mm-hmm. So last year was an NIT trip. The Broncos hadn't been to the NIT in a while. And we had an earlier interview with Brandon Pajemski talking about looking up, and I was talking to him out on the floor at the Leavey Center, was looking up into the rafters and saying, I want to add a banner. I want to add something that shows that, hey, we were here and we were able to succeed to the level that they all think they can. And so everybody's excited. You can see it in the fan base. A non-conference game with the school out, like Boise, even though Boise's fantastic. Leon Rice has their team doing, great things there the last few years. We had a good turnout. And that's where it needs to be every game. And I think you're starting to get there with this group.
So, I mean, again, you mentioned the Boise State game. That was a big win for this program. This was a matchup that they had a year ago. This was the return game. They get a big win in that game. Carlos Stewart with 25. Talk about the momentum kind of going into WCC play. I think they've now won 4 in a row. Obviously, they only have the 3 losses. But this team is playing well as we're starting to enter in the WCC play. So kind of what's your outlook on, like, what we should expect, or what are the vibes as we enter the conference slate?
Vibes are good. And they had after some early travel, which saw them play at Utah State early in non-conference, and then on that trip was then go and play in the Bahamas and beat a DePaul team, and then come up just short against the University of Central Florida in that championship game of the tournament in the Bahamas. They were able to get the 9 games at home in December and take care of business, except for the one hiccup against San Jose State at home. Like we said, that game, no matter where teams are in the rankings, and San Jose State is proving to be a lot better than I think people thought they were at the start of the year. So a good San Jose State team, but that really was the only blip in the month of December for Santa Clara. So I think they feel like they have the momentum going with a little bit of a break for the holidays. I think it was a stretch of 5 games in 12 days, and teams are doing that. So Santa Clara is not the only team to do that. But again, back to the strength and conditioning and the training staff, the players were able to get through it, perform to the level that they needed to get the victories. And I think they're ready to go. I mean, USF and then St. Mary's to start conference play. Every team will be difficult in the West Coast Conference this year. There are no easy games. So let's get it started with a rivalry, a couple of them. And I'm super excited for this.
And as we kind of transition into those matchups, we have USF and St. Mary's this week. Santa Clara got a W against St. Mary's a year ago. They got one against USF. So these are rivalry games. Like, these are the classic WCC old school rivalry games. And so as we start to look forward to, like, what we should see against USF, and then also for St. Mary's, how do you see, like, this version of Santa Clara matching up with the Dons and then with the Gales?
I've only had a chance to see USF a few times on TV. They really had a fantastic game against Arizona State. I think anybody expecting a big drop off from last year's team that went to the NCAA tournament under Todd Golden is in for a surprise. Don't be surprised that this team does well. As far as Santa Clara is concerned, I mean, I don't think the Broncos have done particularly well on the road at USF, but they have played a little bit better against the Dons at home. Broncos are a guard dominated team right now. I think we've discussed that a little bit already. But Parker Brown and Jaden Bediako are veterans. And so I think if Santa Clara can have success with those two guys, they're going to be in a really good place against both USF and St. Mary's. Now, like I said, I mean, Randy Bennett and St. Mary's and USF, really good teams. Every team in the West Coast Conference is a good team. So I think it's a game in and game out. It's going to hinge on, a turnover here or there, or it's an off shooting night for one team. Which team can turn up the defense a little bit more? And Santa Clara's defense has been improving. They held Boise State to 50, I think it was 58 points. 58. So under 60. And so, those are the things that I think every team, hey, don't turn the ball over, rebound, play defense, and then things are going to go your way. And I don't think that's any different for either team on the side of these rivalries going into this conference openers.
Yeah, I don't think there's any team you could really overlook. And obviously, like, Santa Clara's got the two of the tougher teams in this first week to kind of kick it off. And so it's going to be exciting to see how Santa Clara is able to kind of play through this, especially I'm excited to see the combo of Pajemski and Stewart play in conference play as this unit, because I think that's going to be one of the more exciting things. Again, I think they're one of they might be the most dynamic duo in the WCC right now. I think maybe a shout out to Pepperdine's Max Lewis and Houston Millette. And then with Gonzaga, maybe Drew Timme, an insert player here as any duo over the Zags.
Well, think about guard trio, right? Yeah. So you've got Carlos and Brandon, and then, like I said, one of the top shooters in Santa Clara history, in Keyshawn Justice, climbing the 3-point makes and 3-point attempted list at Santa Clara history. He's in the top 4 in both of them now, or top 5, I believe. Yeah. I'd have to go back and look at the notes, but I mean, those three guys are fantastic. And I said, Parker Brown and Jaden Bediako, they have experience. I mean, these guys are seniors. So I can't wait to start. I mean, can we play this tomorrow?
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Anthony, for hopping on, chatting some Santa Clara basketball. WCC play is here. You're excited to get it going. I'm excited to get it going. And we all start on Thursday. So thanks again for hopping on, and I'll catch you down the road. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, Zach. I want to thank Anthony Passarelli one more time for hopping on. It's great to always chat with him about Bronco basketball. And this is a huge matchup on Thursday. So this is going to be a key moment as we look into March and even into Vegas, because this could be a matchup we're looking back at as being the difference between someone getting a bye and someone not getting a bye, or getting a double bye, or whatever else. I think this is going to be a huge matchup for the standings as we move along. And again, last year, a half game did make the difference for USF and Santa Clara. So let's not forget that actually did make a difference in the seedings. But as we start to talk about USF and the matchup here, USF has also had a really interesting week and a half. They had a stretch of 4 games in 6 nights. They beat UNLV, a previously undefeated UNLV, a huge win for USF. I think this was a team that was coming off losses to Utah State and New Mexico, 2 teams who were also undefeated at that time. New Mexico still undefeated. And we were wondering if USF was going to be able to get over that hump and get one of these big wins. And they did. They finally got that win against UNLV. And then a couple nights later, they fall flat against UT Arlington. Coach Gerlufsen even brings up the fact in the post-game presser in that one that he needed to do a better job to make sure that his guys were ready. So That's an obvious one. Like they didn't play as well. They had a chance at the end, but still came up short. They came out flat. And 2 nights later, they come out against number 25 Arizona State and absolutely steamroll the Sun Devils. They were up 24-2 at one point. And it was an absolute kind of masterpiece for USF, a huge feather in their cap. So much to the point, it actually, I think I looked and it dropped Arizona State like 30 points in the net for that loss. This is a good, dangerous USF team. They're not as necessarily dynamic as they were a year ago. You don't have a Jamari Bouye. You don't have a Yawan Masalski sitting there in the middle, but this is a solid team that you cannot overlook. Otherwise, they will take advantage of you. And one of the things we're starting to see, especially over these last couple weeks, is that the rotations are starting to filter themselves out. This was a team that lost 4 starters from a year ago, the only one returning being Khalil Shabazz. And there was going to be some growing pains early on, just trying to figure out who fit with who, like what was going to be the offensive rotation, what were the defensive rotations, who were the units that worked best together. And we've seen a lot of iterations of the USF starting lineup so far, but we are starting to see a little bit of consistency in the last few weeks. And one of those consistent components over the last even just 4 games has been the insertion of Isaiah Hawthorne into the starting lineup. He's been really critical over the course of the preseason, just in the moments he's gotten opportunities, and in the last 4 games. This, again, like Hawthorne, this is a guy who hasn't played much each of the last couple of years. He only played 7 minutes a game as a freshman. He only played in 7 games a year ago. But now he's shooting 50% from the field. He's shooting 47% from 3. And in the last 2, he had 19 against Arizona State. He scored 20 against Hartford. This is a guy that Chris Gerlufsen clearly is putting a lot of trust in. This is a guy who is starting to kind of grow into his role. And it was there was a lot of question of like who was going to come back, who wasn't. You had a new head coach and everything else, even those like within the system and everything else. So we'll talk a little bit about that with coach in a bit. And this USF team also, we're starting to see more contributions from Zane Meeks. Zane Meeks has also been a huge component, huge part of what USF has been able to do. Again, this is a team that's 11-4, and 3 of those losses have been by less than 10. And yeah, those losses do hurt. The Davidson loss hurts just the way it happened. New Mexico coming up just short against that team is a missed opportunity. You also have the loss to UT Arlington, and that one is going to really sting as we go down the stretch. I think I looked, and that's a Q4 loss. So USF has quite a bit of work to do to probably get back into the NIT conversation. I think that's a place where they could definitely end up. And honestly, to look at where USF is right now is still pretty impressive, considering, again, you lose 4 starters. I even thought before the year that the idea of them returning to the NCAA tournament was lofty. I did not think they had the talent. I did not think that they had the capability. And unfortunately, I think they've already picked up enough losses that's probably going to keep them out of that conversation. But this is still a dangerous team. This is still a team that could steal a game from a St. Mary's. Again, like this is also a little bit of a smaller team as well. Like they've kind of mixed and matched on the front court. Zane Meeks has played center a good chunk of the time, giving them a stretch 5. We've also seen them be able to play a little bit bigger with the likes of Jijiberry stepping in as that starting center. He's been in and out of the starting lineup again, like mixing and matching based on the matchups. But we've started to see at least a little bit more consistency in that starting rotation. Like over the last, I think it's the last 4 games, the 3 consistents have been Ty Roberts, Khalil Shabazz, and then also Hawthorne. But then we've seen like the consistent rotations between the others, whether it be Marcus Williams or Zane Meeks stepping in, Josh Coonan also being a part of that unit. and all of them are capable starters. And I think that's one of the great things about what USF has right now is that they have a lot of guys with starting experience who can step up into roles as needed. Even though there have been some parts where like there were guys that we expected to be stepping up and they haven't really been able to help all that much or crack the lineup. But USF has also put themselves in a really good position to be in position as we head into conference play. And let's get a little bit more in depth with that, where Santa Clara, where USF is, and we'll bring in head coach Chris Gerlufsen. I'm going to bring on USF head coach Chris Gerlufsen. The Dons are currently 11-4, coming off of a stretch where they're 3-1 with 4 games in the last 6 days. Coach, how's it going?
Going great. Good to connect with you, Zach. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, for sure. And I mentioned the recent stretch. You've had 4 games in the last 6 days, and kind of talk about just how the team has kind of responded through this stretch. You had a great win against UNLV, a comeback win there late. You do have the kind of like the slip up against Arlington, but then come right back against Arizona State and have a masterful performance against them at home. Kind of talk about just like what like the last week has kind of shown you about your team and the way they've been able to bounce back and really win against some of the tougher opponents in the country.
Yeah, no, the last 6 days, I mean, it's been a brutal stretch for us, just from a physical standpoint, mental standpoint, probably poor judgment on me squeezing the Arlington game in the way that I did in between the UNLV game and the Arizona State game. But I'm really proud of our guys. And unfortunately, sometimes, going through a little bit of adversity is where you learn the most about your team. And, we had that hiccup against UT Arlington. All credit to them. They outplayed us on that night, and they deserved to win the game. But I was just so proud of the way that our just program responded, and to bounce back and to beat a top 25 team on our home floor the way that we did, and then turn around in less than 24 hours. And we played again last night against University of Hartford. So to get 2 good wins heading into the break, I'm optimistic and I'm excited about what we can do kind of going forward.
You had some solid games in November, and then you really kind of had the hardest stretch of your non-conference there in December. You had the kind of the Mountain West gauntlet with Utah State, UNLV, New Mexico. What did you learn about your team against these really tough opponents? I mean, you had, I think at the time, it was like 3 straight opponents that were all undefeated at that point. It's kind of what did you learn about your team, even with like some of those tough outcomes at the end?
Yeah, I mean, we learned a lot. I think we've tweaked our lineup a little bit. We've tweaked some of our rotations. Some of the things that we needed to address on both sides of the basketball, whether offensively or defensively, kind of revealed themselves. And playing quality opponents like that and really testing yourself, I think is great for us. Those are the games that we want to play. And as you said, you learn a lot about your team in the non-conference portion, which hopefully can help transition and prepare you for, we all know the WCC is a gauntlet, but I really feel like our non-conference schedule has prepared us for what's to come.
And you kind of talk about some of those lineup changes. One of the recent lineup changes that Isaiah Hawthorne has jumped into the starting lineup the last few games. Kind of talk about like his progression, because this was a guy who didn't play a ton a year ago, the last 2 years, and he's been a huge part of what you've been able to do so far.
Yeah, I just have a ton of respect for Isaiah and kind of how he's gone about the college process. And unfortunately, in today's landscape, the natural instinct is to kind of pick your stuff up and run when stuff doesn't go your way. And to Isaiah's credit, he's just kind of stuck with it and put a lot of work in behind the scenes. And he's a guy who I really have a lot of trust in. The scary thing is he hasn't played a lot of minutes. So I think, as you see, the more game minutes he gets, the more reps he gets, he's getting a lot more comfortable. And he's played tremendously for us the last 2 games. But he did that at the beginning of the year too, when he was playing spot minutes and not playing as many minutes as he's playing now. And So I'm excited about what he can do. I think he's still got a lot of growth left in him. And I think he's just kind of, as I always say, kind of scratching the surface in terms of what he can become as a player. And he's important on both sides of the ball for our team.
How'd those conversations go with him as like kind of like as he made the decision to kind of like really like push through and work harder here at there at USF? What was kind of the conversation either early on in the season, before this season, so that he can kind of figure out what he needed to improve upon, and how have you seen that develop throughout the course of this season?
Yeah, I mean, going back to when, Coach Golden left for Florida, Isaiah was one of the first guys that I kind of grabbed and told him that I had a plan for him, as did the rest of our staff. And we just invested in him and poured a lot of kind of effort into trying to develop him and love on him a little bit and build him up. And, he changed some of his habits on the floor, off the floor. And I think he's seeing the rewards of doing that. And just, I can't say it enough how proud I am of a kid for just sticking with it, and it's rewarding to see him have some success and be a key piece to our team after, not playing much the last 3 years.
For sure. And another guy who has gotten a lot more playing time this year has been Zane Meeks. And he is also another guy that's been really critical for you guys, especially on the offensive end. Like he's been because he's kind of been like in a lot of your rotations, been kind of the pseudo five in a lot of your lineups. Kind of talk about like just the growth that we've seen from Zane from last year to this year, where it seems like he's really kind of like figured out what his role is.
Yeah, no, he's grown up too. We kind of, with the way our roster was put together, we made a concerted decision to play him more at the 5 this year. And I think from an offensive standpoint, that has allowed him to maybe take a step and be a harder of a matchup. He's a guy who really spaces and stretches the floor with his ability to shoot. We can play through him in the high post, but he's sneaky good on the block too. He scored down low for us and scored with his back to the basket, and he's been a really good rebounder for us. So I'm happy with Zane because he's made some strides on the defensive end, and that was always kind of the knock on him, was that, he was a very good offensive player, but maybe a little bit limited defensively. And he's made some strides and really taken a jump in terms of being a better, just more solid defender for us.
And as we kind of look at this roster, because again, like we talked about a couple of returners in Isaiah and Zane. Well, you had a lot of newcomers coming into this team between, talk about Ty Roberts or Marcus Williams. How about Seba is another one who's really kind of like stepped in. Talk about like how like all of the new pieces have really started to gel, and how, at what point is like, did it look like that the rotations, and have you started to kind of figure out what those rotations were with all the new guys in, and how have they gelled in with the rest of the group?
No, it's a good question. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's a little bit trial and error. When you bring in guys who are all very good players and you're trying to fit pieces together and figure out, how to play with certain guys and certain lineups. And so I think throughout the non-conference, we showed glimpses in games, but never really put it together in terms of what it could really look like collectively. And thankfully, the Arizona State game was a game where it really clicked and came together. But over the last probably 10 days, I've seen a lot of growth in our group in terms of just our cohesiveness, our togetherness, in the way that we're kind of sharing the ball a lot better than we did early in the year. And that's a big, big key for us from an offensive standpoint. Because we do, I feel like, have a lot of weapons from, guys who can score the ball. So sharing the ball and playing with each other was a big key for us. And I think we're finally starting to understand what that needs to look like.
And as you head into conference play, I think it looks like this team is in a good position to be in a position. Like kind of like that. Because I think I saw like today, like you're right around like 83 in the net, or right around there, with some very good opportunities coming up. As you start to go into WCC play, you have Santa Clara this week, which is obviously like they've had a great non-conference as well. Kind of talk about like what the the vibes of the team, and maybe that's obviously you'll have a little bit more of a feel for that after Christmas when everyone is able to get back together. How are you feeling going into conference play of where you think where you kind of like think you stand with the rest of the WCC?
Yeah, I'm super optimistic. I can't wait for our guys to get back, so we can get back to work. And I think our guys went home with that same feeling of, okay, like, all right, we're finally starting to scratch the surface in terms of what we can be as a team. And we're starting to click and gel at the right time. So I can't wait for WCC play. I was looking at the standings this morning in terms of what, everyone's record is in league. And, people have had some tremendous non-conference performances. Santa Clara, I think 12-3, had a great win yesterday against Boise. LMU's playing really well. BYU had some big wins. I know they struggled early, but BYU is always BYU when you get into conference play. And then you have the knowns in terms of St. Mary's and Gonzaga. So there's no off nights, but we're excited. As you said, I think there are a lot of opportunities left on our schedule for us to improve what our resume is, and we're going to take it one game at a time. I know we open up with Santa Clara, so the next 5 days, whatever it is, we'll really dive in and get dialed in on them. Tremendous amount of respect for Coach Sendek and what he's done there over his career and at Santa Clara. So I know it'll be a tough game to open up play.
All right. And just to wrap it up, all right, is there a holiday tradition that you have every year with your family, or is there something that you do around the holidays that always kind of like is something you have to do?
That's a great question. So obviously being a college basketball coach, your holidays never really feel like traditional holidays in that sense. But we always try to have some of the players over on Christmas Day, the guys, international guys or guys who couldn't make it home. So that's what we're busy doing today, getting ready for that. We're going to have probably 6 to 8 guys over with their girlfriends on Christmas Day. And that's the day that I really look forward to because not able to see my family back on the East Coast. So being able to spend it with some of the key people in your program and just provide a really good meal and just kind of relax and hang out with them. That's what I look forward to the most.
All right. Well, I'll let you go. Congrats, Coach, on the success so far to this point of the season. Good luck in WCC play. And as a USF alum myself, I will go ahead and say go Dons.
Go Dons. I appreciate it, Zach.
One more time, I want to thank Coach Gerlufsen for hopping on. Great to chat with him again. And for USF, they're in position to be in position. They have opportunities here in conference play. They're going to be dangerous. I don't think you can really you have to kind of take the Arlington game with a grain of salt. I think what this team has becomes a little bit more apparent by what we saw against Arizona State and against UNLV. I think that's the team we're going to see throughout the course of conference play. So they're tough out. They're going to be a tough matchup. I expect them to be one of the top 4 teams in the WCC. We'll see how it all plays out. And for Thursday, the biggest matchup of the week, Santa Clara hosting USF. This is, I think, going to be one of the more entertaining games we see all year long. They had 2 of the best matchups last year. Like they had maybe the best game in the WCC a year ago with the game at USF. And that game was so entertaining, just the way both of these teams play. I think we're going to see a very similar game on Thursday. Just these 2 teams going back and forth. I think just to me, this game is going to be a bit of a coin flip. I would give the edge to Santa Clara only for the fact that they're at the Leavey Center. I think they're going to match up a little bit on. I think USF's going to go a little smaller and force Santa Clara to play that way. So I think that's where they're going to go. And USF has the rotation of guards to be able to try to at least slow down Pajemski and Stewart. So it's a fascinating matchup. I'm going to lean Santa Clara for this first one, just for the sake of location alone. And the rest of the week, there's a bunch of interesting matchups throughout the course of the week as we start to play. BYU is going to be on the road to start at Pacific. This BYU team has won 5 in a row, but they've also played down to their competition. So the fact that they have Pacific and Portland on their schedule in the first week, I think is going to be a telling sign for what the Cougars are going to be throughout conference play. Have they fixed some of those problems that we saw early on in the year, these inconsistencies, or are those inconsistencies going to hold form? Yes, they have wins over Creighton, and they then also beat Utah. But again, they play up to those teams, and we've seen them play down to South Dakota. So while I think it's hats off to BYU for having their 5-game winning streak, and it looks like they're pointing in the right direction, I want to wait and see for them to play a team on paper that is lesser than they are, and see what happens. And another big one this week, as we talk about teams and how they performed recently, Portland seems to be heading in the wrong direction. They've lost 3. I believe I was looking at it. They've lost 3 of 4. And this is going to be on Thursday, a matchup that Portland needs. They host LMU on Thursday. This is one I think they have to have to really kind of get back out of this funk that they've been in. They have one of the tougher weeks as well. Like, they do host LMU, and then they head off to play BYU and Provo. So Portland is going to get tested right away to see if what we thought in the preseason was who we thought they would be. We saw during the PK 85, we saw the high end, but throughout the course of the rest of the non-conference, we've seen the low end loss to San Diego, not San Diego, North Dakota State sticks out there. So this is a team that really has to, I think, regroup, gather themselves as we head in the conference play. They have 2 big matchups right away, so they have to get it done. And for St. Mary's, I think this is a big matchup for them on Saturday. Not to discount the fact they have San Diego on Thursday, but the big matchup is going to be at Santa Clara. Again, this is a Santa Clara team that is dangerous, and St. Mary's has already picked up a couple of losses to teams that maybe they should have beaten. All their losses are by, I believe it's less than 10 points. They have lost a combined 4 games by a total of 16 points. This is a team that is going to be in every single game they play, but they've also had some games where they've kind of fallen asleep at the wheel at times, and they can't do that against Santa Clara on their own. And this team knows that. And I think we saw that against Wyoming last week, where they did bounce back after losing to Colorado State, but the Colorado State loss shouldn't have happened. The loss to Washington shouldn't have happened. They've lost too many of these close games that I think St. Mary's no longer has the wiggle room that they once did earlier on in the non-conference. So again, big matchups. I think Santa Clara, St. Mary's is probably the second best game of the week. And then I'm really looking at the Portland week, Portland hosting LMU, and then Portland at BYU. A lot of great matchups. Gonzaga will start on Saturday. They do have one more non-conference this week before they host Pepperdine on Saturday. So again, I'm excited. We're already to conference play. We're going to get going this week. It's a great way to celebrate the holidays is with another conference season. Bunch of games on New Year's Eve. I think I'm looking at it. Every game will be starting. No, I take it back. I was going to say every game is early. No, BYU will be playing at 6 p.m. that night. 6 p.m. I should say Pacific time. That'll be 7 o'clock local. Everyone else is at 2 and 4. And I expect that I talked about how this conference season 3 through 9 really now was going to be a bloodbath, and I expect that bloodbath to start this week. Teams are going to beat each other up. Teams are going to lose games you think they are not. Teams are going to beat teams you think they're not. This is going to be an exciting conference season. I'm just ready to get it going. All right. Well, that'll do it. I want to thank my guests again, Anthony Passarelli and head coach Chris Gerlufsen, for stopping by and chatting about the matchup, chatting about Santa Clara and USF respectfully. And we'll get out And we'll get out of here. Be sure to subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Be sure to like and share the podcast on your favorite streaming service. Follow me on Twitter at PostByZach and on TikTok at PostByZach. And until next week, I will catch you later.